The gate nobody opens. Air smelled of dust and memories as Sundar Pichai stood quietly outside the tall iron gate. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung heavy, spilling gold over the cracked walls of the orphanage. The paint was peeling. The windows looked empty. The sign above the gate read Home of Little Stars, but most of its letters had fallen off years ago. Now it just said Am of Little Stars. Sundar's driver waited behind him, unsure whether to speak. Nobody had expected Sundar Pichai, the world-famous CEO, to show up here. And yet, here he was, wearing a simple white shirt, holding a folder in his hand, and staring at the locked gate like it held some ancient secret. A stray dog limped past, him sniffing at the dust. Sundar reached down and patted its head absent-mindedly. Then he stepped closer to the gate and shook it gently, got it rattled, but did not open. Behind the gate, he could see a courtyard littered with broken toys, faded swings hanging by a single chain. And in the far corner, a boy in torn clothes sitting on the ground, hugging his knees. The boy didn't even look up. Sundar called softly through the bars. "Hello," his voice echoed. Nothing happened. He called again, louder this time, slowly. A woman in a faded blue sari appeared from a dark doorway. She walked toward him with a kind of wary dignity, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes narrowed as she got closer. "We are closed," she said, her voice flat. Sundar tilted his head. "Closed? But it's still light out." "We are? Always close to people like you," she said. He smiled faintly. "People like me? People with cameras? People who make promises and then forget?" "I didn't bring a camera," he said, lifting his empty hands. She eyed him suspiciously, then noticed the folder he was holding. She gestured to it. "What's in there?" "Papers," he said simply. "What kind of papers?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached through the bars and extended the folder. She hesitated, then took it and opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page and widened. "You bought this place?" she said in disbelief. Sundar nodded once. "Why?" she asked, almost a whisper. He met her eyes and said quietly, "Because I grew up closer to this place than you think." For the first time, her stern face softened, and she stepped back, unhooking the lock. The gate groaned as it swung open. "Come in," she said, as he stepped inside. He felt something shift in the air. The boy in the corner finally looked up at him, his eyes dark and watchful. Sundar gave him a small smile, but the boy quickly looked away. The woman led him through the courtyard and into the main building. Inside, the smell of damp walls and old cooking filled the air. Children peeked out from behind doorways as he walked past. Most of them looked no older than 8 or 9. None of them smiled. She led him to a small office at the back. The ceiling fan spun slowly, making a tired, whirring sound. She gestured to a chair. He sat down. "My name is Padma," she said, sitting opposite him. "I have run this orphanage for 20 years. We are broke. The children haven't had milk for 2 weeks, and now you own it." He listened quietly, his hands folded on the table. "What are you planning to do?" she asked finally. Sundar looked around the little office, at the dusty certificates on the walls, at the broken drawer that wouldn't close, at the faded photo of what must have once been a big, happy group of children. "I'm going to fix it," he said softly. Padma let out a short, bitter laugh. "Many men have said those words. None have done it." "Then let me be the first," Sundar said simply. But as he said it, he heard a loud crash from outside. Both of them stood and rushed into the courtyard. There, near the swings, 3 older boys stood over the small boy Sundar had seen earlier. The little boy's wooden toy truck lay smashed on the ground. "Leave him alone," Sundar called out, his voice sharper now. The boys froze when they saw him. One of them muttered something under his breath and ran. The others followed. Sundar walked over and crouched beside the boy. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The boy didn't answer. "Are you hurt?" Sundar tried again. The boy shook his head but didn't meet his eyes. Padma arrived out of breath. "That's Ravi," she said. "He doesn't speak much." Sundar picked up the broken toy and handed it to Ravi. I'll fix this too, he promised. Ravi finally looked at him, and in his eyes was a question Sundar knew too well. Will you? Really? That night, Sundar sat in his hotel room, staring out the window. The city stretched out in lights below him, but his mind was still in that courtyard. He thought of Ravi's silent question. He thought of Padma's bitterness. And he thought of the gate, heavy and reluctant to open. He opened his laptop and began typing notes. 1. Repair the gate. Clean the courtyard. Repaint the sign. Meet each child. Talk to Padma about needs. Find out why the boys bully Ravi, as he typed. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. A nervous excitement, like standing at the edge of something bigger than himself. The next morning, he returned to the orphanage before sunrise. This time, Padma was already waiting for him, arms crossed. You came back? She said, surprised. I said I would, Sundar replied. Together. They walked through the courtyard. Already a few workers he had hired overnight were unloading paint cans and tools. The children watched from doorways, whispering to each other. But as they reached the gate, Sundar noticed something strange. The lock was broken. Did you open it early? He asked Padma. She shook her head, frowning. They stepped outside and saw muddy footprints leading away from the gate and into the street. Someone was here last night. Sundar said quietly. Padma stiffened. There are people who don't want this place to survive, she admitted. Why? She hesitated, then said, because of what's buried here. Sundar froze. Buried? Padma didn't answer, but her eyes darted toward the far corner of the courtyard, the same corner where Ravi had been sitting yesterday. Before he could ask more, a worker called out, Sir, you should see this. Sundar and Padma hurried back inside. In the main hall, the workers had moved an old rug and discovered a trapdoor in the floor, hidden under years of dust. Did you know about this? Sundar asked Padma. She shook her head, looking pale. One of the workers pulled at the rusty handle. The trapdoor groaned and lifted, revealing a dark stairway leading underground. A cold wind blew from below. Sundar looked at Padma, then back at the stairway. What's down there? He asked. Padma whispered, almost to herself, the reason nobody ever opens the gate. And with that, the air grew colder, and from the darkness below, they heard a faint sound, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. He turned to Padma. Give me a light, he said, but as the worker handed him a flashlight, Sundar noticed something on the floor next to the trapdoor. A small wooden toy truck, exactly like Ravi's, but old and cracked with age. He picked it up, and on the bottom, carved into the wood, was a single word. It said, call on Ravi. He stared at it, heart pounding as the crying from below grew louder. And then, before he could descend, the trapdoor slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang, plunging the room into silence. Asterisk the crying beneath the floor, trapdoor slammed shut so hard that dust rained from the ceiling, settling into Sundar's hair and clothes. He stood still, staring at the floor where the wood met the frame perfectly, as though it had never been opened at all. The wooden toy truck still lay in his palm, its edges rough and splintered, its weight heavier than it should have been. In the silence that followed, even the faint crying sound seemed to vanish. Padma stood behind him, arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes fixed on the trapdoor. Her lips moved slightly, as though forming words she couldn't say aloud. Sundar could hear her uneven breathing in the quiet room. Slowly, he crouched, pressing his fingers against the trapdoor's edge. It was cool to the touch, the wood oddly damp. He tried to lift it again, but it would not budge. The handle refused to turn, like it had fused to the floor. Sundar sat back on his heels and looked at Padma. How long has this been here? He asked, his voice softer now, though it sounded loud in the empty room. She shook her head, eyes distant. I never knew. I never thought to look beneath the rug. Sundar studied her face. There was something more there, a shadow of Fear she wasn't ready to name. He set the toy truck down on the floor beside him and stood, brushing his hands off. "Tell me what you do know," he said gently. Padma hesitated, glancing toward the doorway where the children still lingered. Peeking in silently, she waved them off and they scattered like birds. "This place," she began slowly, lowering herself into a chair, "was built nearly 70 years ago. Even back then, it was called the home of little stars. My mother worked here when I was a child. She told me stories about the first children who lived here. Children who came from the streets, or were left behind in hospitals, or simply found sleeping under trees. She said they were different. Different how?" Sundar asked, pulling up another chair and sitting across from her. Padma's eyes darted to the trapdoor again. They were quiet. They never cried, never spoke much. But sometimes, at night, the staff heard them playing. "Down there?" She pointed at the floor. Sundar felt a chill creep through him. "Down there, in the cellar?" Padma's lips pressed into a thin line. "We didn't know there was a cellar. But my mother swore she heard laughter and footsteps from below." Long after the children had gone to bed, Sundar leaned back in his chair, the words heavy in his mind. "One night," she continued, her voice dropping lower, "the staff woke up to find all the children gone. Doors locked from the inside, windows shut. They searched for hours before someone thought to look in the courtyard. That's when they noticed the rug had moved slightly. They found the trapdoor open, and all the children were inside." Sundar felt his throat tighten. "Were they alive?" Padma nodded once. "Yes, alive, but different. My mother said their eyes were black as night, and when they looked up, they all whispered the same word, Ravi." The name echoed in Sundar's mind, matched by the faint weight of the toy truck in his memory. He exhaled slowly. And then, Padma's gaze dropped to the floor. The next morning, the founder sealed the trapdoor. Nobody was allowed to speak of it. The children were adopted out one by one, and the staff was told to forget. And did they? Sundar asked. Padma looked up at him then, her face pale but firm. "Some things you cannot forget." The silence that followed was thick, as though the air itself was listening. Sundar felt a sudden urgency rising in him, not just to renovate the orphanage, but to uncover what was truly hidden here. He stood and walked to the trapdoor again, crouching to inspect it more closely. The wood bore faint carvings now visible through the dust, small, rough lines etched like the work of a child's fingernails. They formed no words he could recognize, just desperate scratches circling the handle. He reached for the handle again and tugged. Nothing. He pressed his ear to the wood, and just as his breath fogged the surface, he heard it, faint at first but unmistakable. The crying had returned, and this time it was closer. Sundar sat back, goosebumps rising along his arms. He could feel Padma's eyes on him, waiting. "We'll need tools," he said finally, his voice steady but quiet. Padma shook her head. "You don't understand. There's more than wood keeping it shut." He met her gaze. "Then we'll find what it is." That evening, after the workers finished painting the gate and left, Sundar stayed behind. The children had eaten dinner, rice and thin curry, and were gathered in their rooms, whispering about the strange man who had come to fix everything. Sundar could hear their voices drifting through the halls as he stood once more over the trapdoor. He had brought a crowbar from the car. As he wedged it under the edge, he felt the wood resist like a muscle tensing beneath the skin. He pressed harder, and the wood groaned but did not give way. Then he heard a voice. "You can't open it," someone said softly. Sundar turned sharply. At the doorway stood Ravi, the boy with the quiet eyes. He clutched his broken toy truck to his chest. Sundar lowered the crowbar. "Why not?" Ravi stepped closer, his bare feet making no sound on the dusty floor. "Because they'll wake up." Sundar crouched so his eyes were level with the boy's. "Who will wake up?" Ravi stared at the trapdoor, his expression unreadable. "Little stars," he whispered. Sundar's breath caught in his throat. "You've been down there, haven't you?" Ravi nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "What did you see?" Ravi's grip tightened on the toy truck until his knuckles went white. After a long silence, he said, "They're waiting for me." Before Sundar could ask more, Padma appeared at the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Ravi," she said, sharply, "back to bed." Ravi lingered another moment, his dark eyes locked on Sundar's, and then he turned and slipped away. Sundar stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He looked down at the trapdoor once more. Then, at Padma. "He knows more than we do," Sundar said quietly. Padma sighed, rubbing her temples. "He's a strange child. Came to us 2 years ago. No family. No papers. He never cries, never laughs, just sits in the corner. And when he sleeps, he talks in his dreams." "What does he say?" Sundar asked. Padma hesitated. "He says, 'Come back to us,' over and over." The words lingered in the air like smoke. That night, Sundar barely slept. He lay on the thin mattress in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling, the sound of crying echoing in his mind. He remembered his own childhood, the tiny room he shared with his cousins, the smell of kerosene lamps, the nights when he lay awake wondering why he never felt like he belonged at dawn. He rose, dressed, and returned to the orphanage before. The sun had fully risen. The courtyard was quiet, the air cool and damp. He could see the faint outline of the trapdoor through the window, and something inside him pulled toward it. This time, he didn't bring tools. He simply walked to it, knelt down, and placed his hand flat against the wood. It was warm now. Almost alive. He closed his eyes, listening. Beneath his palm, he felt a faint vibration, like footsteps running in circles far below. And then a whisper, faint but clear. He pulled his hand back sharply, his heart hammering in his chest. He stood, turning toward the door, and froze. There, in the doorway, stood Ravi. But this time, something was different. His eyes, they were darker now, as though the stars themselves had taken root in them. He held out the broken toy truck to Sundar. "You'll need this," he said, his voice calm, though it sounded much older than a child's. Sundar stared at him. "Why?" Ravi tilted his head, and for the briefest moment, Sundar thought he saw other shapes moving behind the boy, faint outlines of children, their hands reaching upward from the floor. "Because you're one of us," Ravi whispered. The words struck Sundar like a blow. He felt his knees weaken, memories he didn't recognize flashing through his mind, a dark stairway, laughter in the shadows, small hands clutching his and then, before he could speak, the trapdoor creaked open slowly on its own, revealing the dark stairway once more. The air that rose from below was colder than anything he'd felt before. Ravi stepped back, his expression solemn. "They're ready now," he said. Sundar looked from the boy to the blackness below, his pulse pounding. In his ears, and then, from the shadows, came the sound of many small voices, rising together, calling his name. Sundar. Sundar. His breath caught in his throat as he felt himself drawn forward, the edge of the stairway waiting. He glanced at Padma, who stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with fear, but she did not stop him. He took the toy truck from Ravi's hand, its wood warm in his fingers now, and stepped to the threshold. The voices grew louder, filling the room with their haunting chorus. Sundar. "Come back to us." And then, with a final breath, Sundar placed his foot on the first step and began to descend into the darkness, the trapdoor closing slowly behind him. Just before it shut completely. The faintest sliver of light revealed the boy's face one last time, and Sundar realized with a jolt that Ravi was smiling. And in that smile, there was something both beautiful and terrifying, as though all the stars of the night sky gathered there to watch him fall. The trapdoor clicked shut, plunging the orphanage into silence. And from somewhere deep below, the laughter began. The stairway of voices. Air grew colder with every step Sundar took. The stairway wound downward in a tight spiral, carved out of stone slick with moisture. His fingers trailed along the damp wall, feeling the grooves where small hands had worn the surface smooth over decades. Above him, The trapdoor had closed completely, sealing him in darkness save for the faint glow of a single bulb that swung far below. It swayed gently, its light barely reaching the walls, throwing long shadows that danced as he descended. Dot in his hand he still clutched. The broken toy truck, its wooden wheels dug into his palm, leaving tiny dents, but he couldn't bring himself to let go. It felt heavier now, like it carried more than just splinters and dust. As he walked, he thought he could feel it, humming softly as though. It had a heartbeat. Dot below him, the faint sound of laughter echoed up the stairwell. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cheerful. It was thin, sharp, and full of something he couldn't name. Not joy. Not mischief, but a kind of longing that chilled him to the bone. He paused on a step, listening more closely. Sundar. The voices knew his name. They didn't whisper it, like ghosts do in old stories. They sang it, softly, like a lullaby. Each time they said it, he felt a little weaker, as though the syllables themselves pulled at him. He pressed on, the walls narrowing as he descended further. Somewhere above, he imagined Padma and Ravi standing silently in the courtyard, waiting for him to return. But part of him already knew he might not return the same. Finally, the stairway ended in a low, arched doorway. The light bulb hung from a rusted wire just inside. He ducked through the arch and stepped into a vast underground chamber. He froze. Space was much larger than the orphanage above, its walls lined with rows and rows of empty beds. The beds were tiny, made of iron, their mattresses thin and rotted. The air smelled of mildew and something sweeter, like old flowers left too long in water. And all around him were the children, dozens of them, maybe more. They stood between the beds and the shadows, silent now, but watching him. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark pools that caught the faint light and held it without blinking. They were barefoot. Their clothes were tattered and colorless, though he could see some. Wore shirts with faint patterns, stars, moons, suns, nearly faded away. Sundar stood there for a long time, unable to move, unable to speak. Asterisk. Then one of the children, a little girl in a frayed dress, stepped forward. She pointed at the toy truck in his hand. "You brought it back," she said, her voice soft but clear. He swallowed hard, unsure if he could speak. I don't understand," he managed, his voice cracking slightly. The girl tilted her head. "You promised you would." His mind raced. Promised? To whom? When another child, this one a boy with messy hair and bare feet, stepped closer and added, "You said you'd come back for us." Sundar's grip tightened on the truck. "When did I say that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The children exchanged glances, but did not answer. Instead, they began to hum, the same tune he had heard faintly from the trapdoor above. A sad, circular melody that filled the chamber like fog. The light bulb overhead flickered. The children formed a circle around him, their little hands reaching out to touch his arms, his clothes. Their skin was cold but strangely comforting, like water on a fevered brow. "We waited," the girl in the frayed dress said. He took a shaky breath. "Who are you?" She looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed to hold the whole night sky and said simply, "We are the little stars." The humming grew louder, more insistent. Sundar felt the weight of the room pressing down on him, 1,000 questions clawing at his mind. Why did they know his name? Why did they say he had promised them something? And why deep inside his chest? Did a part of him believe them? He looked down at the toy truck in his hand. The word Ravi carved into the bottom seemed to glow faintly now, and as he stared at it, a memory flickered across his mind. So quick he almost missed it. A memory of himself, much younger, running through a dark corridor, clutching this very truck, laughing breathlessly as dozens of children chased him, calling his name. His knees buckled, and he sank onto the nearest bed, his breath coming fast. The children watched silently, the circle tightening around him. "You were one of us," the boy with messy hair said softly. "But you left," another child whispered, "and you forgot." A third added. Their voices layered over one another. filling the room with an almost unbearable weight. Sundar pressed his palms to his eyes, shaking his head. No, no, that's not possible. But the memories kept coming. Fragments now, a dark night, a rug pulled aside, a trapdoor, laughter and running and games in the dark. A promise whispered to the little stars, I'll come back for you. I swear I will not. He lowered his hands, his whole body trembling. The children were closer now, their eyes shining in the dim light. Why did you leave us? The girl asked, her voice breaking slightly. He looked at her helplessly, his throat tight. I don't remember. She stepped forward and gently placed her small hand over his heart. But we remember you, she said, and then, as though her touch had unlocked something inside him, the entire room seemed to shift. The walls brightened faintly, revealing carvings he hadn't seen before, drawings etched deep into the stone. Stars, moons, children holding hands. A boy holding a truck above his head. He stumbled to his feet, his mind reeling. I was here, he murmured. The girl nodded. And you promised to save us. Sundar turned slowly, taking in the full chamber now. Beyond the beds, he could see other corridors leading further into the earth. Faint lights glimmered down those hallways. And in the air, the children's humming swelled, as if urging him on. He looked down at the girl, whose eyes had softened now. How? He asked her. How can I save you? She smiled faintly, though there was sadness in it. You already know. Behind him, the walls began to shake gently, gusts falling like snow. The humming grew louder, almost desperate. Sundar felt it too. The pressure building, the sense of something vast and unseen, waiting just beyond the next doorway. He closed his hand around the toy truck and took a deep breath. Show me, he said. The girl turned and pointed down one of the dark corridors. He followed her finger. And as his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A faint light glowing at the far end, brighter than the rest. Without another word, he stepped out of the circle and walked toward it. As he passed through the corridor, the humming behind him faded, replaced by whispers, words just out of reach. Like fragments of forgotten lullabies. The air grew colder, and the walls here bore different carvings, not children and stars anymore, but doors. Hundreds of doors, each one slightly ajar. Each one with a single word carved above it. Return. He walked past door after door, the light ahead growing brighter, until he reached the end of the corridor. There, in a small alcove, stood a single door unlike the others. It was made of dark wood, polished and unmarked except for one thing. In the center was carved the word Sundar. He stared at it, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it echo in his ears. The children's voices returned. Then, rising up all around him, though he could not see them anymore. Open it. Open it. Open it. His fingers shook as he reached out, resting his hand on the cold wood. The toy truck in his other hand vibrated faintly, its weight nearly unbearable. Now. He turned the handle. The door swung inward with a groan, revealing a blinding white light. Beyond. For a moment, he couldn't see anything. Couldn't feel anything but warmth rushing over him. And then, slowly, shapes emerged from the light. Dozens, hundreds of children, their faces no longer pale or sad, but smiling, radiant. At the center of them stood Ravi. But now Ravi looked older somehow, taller, his eyes full of something ancient and kind. Welcome home, Ravi said softly. The light flared brighter, and Sundar felt himself being pulled forward. The ground falling away beneath his feet. Behind him, the door began to close. He turned back once, just in time to see the dark corridor fading. The carvings on the walls glowing faintly one last time. As the door shut completely. The sound of laughter filled the air, real laughter now, joyful, endless. And then the light swallowed him whole. Asterisk the room of forgotten stars when Sundar opened his eyes. The world around him was not the same. The blinding white light faded slowly into a golden glow, soft and warm, as though the sun itself had settled here, underground. He stood in the center of an immense circular room, its ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. The walls shimmered, faintly, as though painted with light itself, and everywhere he looked, there were children sitting on the floor, perched on ledges, leaning against the walls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Yet the air was silent, waiting. The children all watched him with calm, knowing eyes. Their faces were no longer pale or sad. Some smiled faintly, as if they already understood everything he didn't. Their eyes sparkled like tiny stars, reflecting. The glow of the room. Sundar felt their gaze heavy on him, but it wasn't unkind. It was expectant. He took a small step forward, feeling the floor beneath his feet hum with energy, like standing on the skin of a drum. He still held the wooden toy truck in his right hand, though it felt different now, lighter but more alive, almost warm enough to burn his palm. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned slowly to see Ravi standing just inside the doorway. He'd come through, though now Ravi appeared transformed. He was taller, no longer the fragile boy who clutched his broken truck and sat silently in corners. His clothes shimmered faintly, and in his eyes, Sundar saw the depth of someone had watched more years pass than should fit in such a small frame. Ravi walked toward him, bare feet soundless on the glowing floor. The crowd of children parted to make way, their expressions soft, reverent even. "You came back," Ravi said. His voice carried easily in the vast chamber, calm and strong. Sundar opened his mouth to speak, but found no words. Ravi stopped a few feet away and tilted his head. "You don't remember yet." "But you will." Sundar shook his head slightly, confused. "What is this place? Why do I feel like I know it?" Ravi smiled faintly, as though he had expected the question. "Because you built it?" he said simply. The words struck Sundar like a wave, leaving him unsteady. "I built this?" Ravi nodded. "A long time ago, when you were still one of us. Before you forgot who you were." Sundar's chest tightened, as memories began to flicker, faint at first, then sharper. A boy running through narrow halls lit with lanterns. Laughter echoing in the dark, tiny hands reaching for his. A promise spoken in the quiet: "I will come back for you. I will build you a sky to live in." His knees felt weak, and he sank to the floor, clutching the toy truck. I don't understand," he whispered, though the truth was already stirring deep inside him. Ravi crouched before him, resting one hand on his shoulder. "You were one of the first. Before you became who you are up there," he said, gesturing faintly toward the ceiling, as though up there meant more than just a world above ground. "You used to play with us. You promised we wouldn't stay here forever. You said you'd build a place where the little stars could shine. But then you forgot. They took you back, and they made you forget." The weight of his own past pressed hard against Sundar's ribs now, making it hard to breathe. He looked around at the children, their expectant faces glowing softly. "How long have you been waiting?" Ravi's eyes darkened slightly, and for the first time Sundar heard a note of pain in his voice. "Too long. Longer than you can count." The words settled in the air like dust dots. Slowly Sundar stood, though. His legs shook. He turned, taking in the vast chamber, the high ceiling lost in shadow, the walls that glimmered faintly with moving shapes, like constellations shifting. And now he noticed something he hadn't before. Asterisk. In the center of the room rose a platform, and on it stood what looked like an enormous door, taller than the ceiling itself, carved with stars, moons, and suns that pulsed faintly with light. The edges of the door glowed more brightly than anything else here, and though it was closed, it radiated a kind of quiet promise, as if behind it waited everything they longed for. He turned to Ravi, pointing toward it. "What is that?" Ravi followed his gaze. "That is the sky you promised us." Sundar stepped closer, feeling the hum of the platform grow stronger with each footfall. "And why is it closed?" "Because only you can open it," Ravi replied. Sundar looked back at the boy, searching his face for answers. "How?" Ravi's eyes softened. "With what you brought." Sundar glanced down at the wooden toy truck in his hand. It felt warmer now, almost glowing faintly in his fingers. The carved letters, Ravi, seemed to shimmer as he stared at them. He climbed the steps to the platform, each one thrumming, faintly under his weight. The children below began to hum softly, their voices weaving together into the same haunting melody he had heard from the trapdoor. But now it felt fuller, hopeful. When he reached the door, he hesitated. It towered above him, vast and ancient, its carvings shifting faintly like clouds on a breeze. He raised the toy truck and pressed it gently against the center of the door. Nothing happened. A low, deep sound rumbled to the room, and the carvings on the door lit up one by one until the entire surface glowed with dazzling light. The toy truck grew hot in his hand, and he instinctively dropped it. But instead of falling, it floated just before the door, spinning slowly in the air, shedding splinters of golden light. A crack appeared down the center of the door, and light poured through, so bright it was hard to look at. The children gasped softly in unison, their voices breaking into quiet laughter that filled the space like wind chimes. But then, just as the door began to open, the light faltered. The crack froze halfway, and the platform beneath Sundar's feet lurched sharply, throwing him to one knee. The air grew heavy, and the children's laughter stopped abruptly. Replaced by uneasy murmurs, Ravi rushed forward, his calm now replaced by urgency. "Something's wrong," he said sharply. Sundar struggled to his feet, staring at the door. The crack in its surface shimmered weakly now, the light behind it flickering. He turned to Ravi. "What is it? Why won't it open?" Ravi's face was pale. "Something is still holding you back. Something up there." And then Sundar felt a thread pulling at him from above, tight and cold. A connection he hadn't noticed before, stretching upward through the stone, through the earth, all the way back to the world he'd left behind. "What is it?" he whispered. Ravi single quotes. Eyes darkened. "They don't want you to finish what you started. They've tied you to their world." Sundar looked back at the door, the light behind it growing dimmer by the second. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice tight. Ravi stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have to cut the thread. You have to let go of the world above. Only then can you open it." Sundar's breath caught in his chest. "But everything I built, my work, my family." Ravi's eyes softened. "You built that for them, but this you built for us." The platform trembled again, and the crack in the door began to close. The light fading. Sundar stood frozen, the weight of two worlds pressing down on him. Behind him, the children's voices rose in a quiet, pleading chorus. "Come back to us." He closed his eyes, feeling the thread pull tighter. Images of his life above flashed through his mind. Boardrooms, screens, interviews, applause. But beneath it all, a quiet emptiness he'd never quite named. And here, in this room, he felt something else entirely. The weight of countless tiny hands reaching for him. Waiting, believing he would keep his promise. He opened his eyes, meeting Ravi's gaze one last time. Then, without another word, he reached into his chest, and though it made him gasp in pain, he pulled. The thread snapped. The sound of it was like thunder rolling through the chamber. And the door before him flared to life, the crack widening until the entire surface split apart, flooding the room with golden light so brilliant it swallowed everything. The children cried out in wonder, their laughter rising again, clearer and louder than before, echoing through the vast chamber. And then Sundar stepped forward into the light. Just as he crossed the threshold, he turned back. Ravi stood at the edge of the platform, smiling softly, his dark eyes shimmering with stars. "You kept your promise," Ravi whispered, and Sundar smiled faintly through the light. "So, did you?" The door closed gently behind him, and the golden glow spilled outward, filling the chamber, cascading up the stairways and spilling into the orphanage above, where Padma stood in the courtyard, her eyes wide as light poured from the cracks of the trapdoor, washing over everything, remaking it all. And then silence, but not empty silence. The kind of silence that comes when something long awaited has finally begun. Asterisk, the other side of the door, golden light was everywhere. It was not just something Sundar saw. It was something he felt, something that sank into his skin, into his bones, as though it had been waiting for him all his life. The moment he stepped through the door, the weight of everything he carried, the suits, the meetings, the expectations fell away, peeling off of him like a heavy coat dropped to the ground. He felt lighter, younger, truer. The space beyond the door was vast, but not in the way the underground chamber had been. It was not made of walls and ceilings. Here there was no ceiling at all. Above him stretched an endless expanse, deep and alive, scattered with millions of shimmering points of light. Each one pulsed faintly, not cold like stars in the sky, but warm, like embers of a shared memory. He took another step forward. Beneath his feet was nothing but a soft, glowing mist that rose and swirled, cradling him with every movement. Around him, he could hear laughter, not eerie or haunting this time, but genuine, unguarded laughter, full of wonder and play. It was the sound of children running barefoot in the dark, unafraid, sure that they were loved. Ahead of him, the mist parted, revealing a path of stones that seemed to float in the dur. They glowed faintly with the same golden light, and as he followed them, he noticed the children appearing on either side of the path. They stood quietly, watching him with calm, expectant eyes, their faces soft and illuminated from within. One of them, the girl in the frayed dress from below, stepped closer. Now her dress was whole again, clean and bright, and her eyes seemed even larger, full of quiet joy. "You're here," she said simply, her voice carrying in the vastness as though the whole place had leaned in to listen. Sundar nodded faintly. "I am," he whispered back, though his voice sounded strange in his own ears, softer, stripped of its usual authority. The girl smiled and took his hand. "We've been waiting for you." She led him farther down the path, and as they walked, Sundar saw what lay beyond. It was a city, but no city he had ever seen or imagined. Towers of light rose into the endless sky, bending and weaving like strands of silk. Bridges of glass and starlight stretched between them. In the air above, children chased each other, their feet barely touching the glowing stones. Gardens bloomed everywhere, bursting with flowers that shimmered faintly and released tiny sparks when touched. Streams of golden water ran through the streets, and where they pooled, the surface rippled with soft images, memories, perhaps flickering like old film reels. Everywhere he looked, he saw faces, familiar yet strange, children he felt he knew somehow, though he couldn't name them. They waved, they laughed, they whispered his name as he passed. He stopped suddenly in the middle of the street, overcome. "What is this place?" He breathed. The girl tilted her head, still holding his hand. "This is the sky you promised us," she said, "the one you swore you'd build." Her words sank into him like stones sinking to the bottom of a pond. He shook his head slowly, though not in denial, more in awe. "But I don't know how I built this," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "You didn't build it with your hands. You built it by remembering us, by loving us enough to keep your promise. The rest we made together." Behind him now, more children appeared, gathering closer. Among them he noticed Ravi, still taller than the others, his dark eyes bright with quiet pride. Ravi stepped forward and placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. "You cut the thread," he said softly. Sundar nodded. "I felt it snap." Ravi glanced up at the shimmering city around them. "That was the final lock. This place has always existed, just waiting for you to open it again. And now you can finish what you started." Sundar looked around, the weight of understanding slowly settling over him. "Finish." Ravi nodded once. "The gate is open now, but we cannot pass through it without you. You're the first and the last, the one who can lead us through." Sundar's breath caught slightly, his chest tightening. "But where does it lead?" Ravi smiled faintly. Oh, there was something sad in it too. To what comes next. For all of us. He turned and pointed toward the far end of the glowing street. There, at the horizon where the mist and the stars melted together, Sundar saw another gate. This one was even larger, even brighter, a towering archway of light so brilliant it was impossible to look at directly. Beyond it, he sensed a vastness that words could never name, not heaven, not the future, but something both and neither. He took a small step toward it, feeling the pull.